Hello, I'm Ted Lohman.
And I'm Peggy Kane.
And we're Off the Record. Thanks for joining us tonight. We have a very special show, a gentleman that's come all the way from Toronto to be with us. And he has told me, Peg, that he has been watching our show since about 94, 95.
I know. Yeah, he remembered a lot of shows that from the past that I'd forgotten.
Some of them I think I wish I would have forgotten. Anyway, the gentleman's name is Bob Todd.
Dobbs.
Dobbs, excuse me. Why did I get that? I messed it up earlier today, too. Bob,
Tony Dodd.
Yeah, Tony Dodd. Bob Dobbs. And if you don't have a VCR running, you might want to put a tape in. The reason for this is we're going to talk about why you're not getting the media, or you're getting the media that is so slanted in one way, and why you're not really getting the truth that we tell here on Off the Record. Why aren't there more shows like this? Why is the media afraid to show something like this? Or are they really afraid? Now, our guest has been involved in, what would you say, Peggy?
Well, from what he has said, he's been a part of the certain families that are called the Illuminati, and was born into this in England, and I believe that's right.
Paris.
In Paris. And so he's had sort of the inside view of what's been going on with the so-called one world government, or the most powerful families on this planet.
Or what the media has portrayed them as throughout the time, to either deify them or to bring them up, or to be able to point a finger in one direction and another direction. And we're going to be getting into this because it's something that you as a viewer need to know, what you're getting bombarded with since the advent of basically written word, the written language.
That's right.
So why don't we start with that? Thank you very much for joining us tonight on the show.
Pleasure, Ted.
And take us back. Take us back to the time when this, I think we talked about it, left brain, right brain started thinking, and where the English language or the written language, the phonetic language, has taken us.
Well, the concept of the Illuminati is only possible in societies that have a written tradition. In Roman times, it would be papyrus and parchment. It disappears in the Middle Ages, the structure of the Illuminati, and then comes back with the printing press. And so the Illuminati is a social structure, a social hierarchy made possible by the printing press. In simple terms, a paper society.
A paper society.
Yeah.
Now, the paper society, let's go back even further than the paper society. Let's start back with a great society that lasted literally thousands of years, the Egyptian society. Didn't they have paper? Or
They had hierarchies, but they didn't have the Illuminati. The Illuminati is a structure that conquers space over thousands of miles.
Okay, explain that a little bit with me.
Well, the most popular image we have of that is Alexander the Great, moving out over the Mediterranean and in the Middle East and into India. Massive spread, created a huge empire because he had the medium of papyrus to organize his armies. Now, Egypt just stays in the Nile area. Sumeria just stays in the Sumer area. Mesopotamia. They are time-based societies. They do not want to dominate over space. They dominate time, which is kind of an Illuminati in terms it has a priesthood. But it is a priesthood that is based on the medium of clay and stone tablets. So those societies are different from the Roman society, which inherits the Greek papyrus medium and creates roads and armies and bureaucracies. And
So-
that's a space dominance.
So the paper would be to be able to spread information to the commanders,
That's right.
and also propaganda
Yep.
to some of the
To the
more
barbarians.
to the barbarians. But where does if you have a written language, and to be able to make it work, people have to become educated. They have to be able to read the written
Right.
language, right?
Right.
How did that fit in? Is that where they set up monks or some kind of teachers to teach the pagans, if you will?
Well, our educational system in the Western tradition is based on the phonetic alphabet, and that's the Greek societies. Now, they started to have education in a more democratic level. It was elitist from our position 2,000 years later. But you go back to the Egyptian societies where the priests were an elite, and they read the manuscripts and the knowledge. That was secret knowledge. There was no involvement with the written materials, ideographic, pictographic languages in the written materials. There was no involvement with that by the average citizen in Egypt. They were involved in rituals and oral and chanting, and you could call it a musical society. So therefore they were involved in that kind of womb. When you bring in writing, and it's particularly the phonetic alphabet, that breaks out of the womb of the closed society of orality and time-based into a horizontal structure, and you begin to try to conquer, and you begin to educate citizens, teaching to read and write.
You made a distinction when we were talking earlier, Bob, between hieroglyphs and then the alphabet as we know it. And that is an important thing, because obviously the Egyptians had what we consider writing, and the Sumerians also had writing, and so did the Orientals. But the Illuminati seems to be a European thing.
That's right.
So what is the difference?
When you bring in the phonetic alphabet, which the Greeks were the ones to crystallize because they isolated the vowels from the consonants. Oral society is a chanting medium where people learn what the pictures mean by active interaction through the singing and chanting, all right? Think of it as medieval chorals where they chanted, the monks chanted.
Right.
And that was during the Dark Age, not what we're talking about, the paper society. There was very little wide-based paper or parchment organization in the medieval period. But back to the Greeks, when you take the phonetic alphabet, it takes the thousands of pictograms and distills it down to 26 or 22 letters, 22 to 26. Those little letters can then go to other cultures which have peculiar pictographic media pertaining to their situation and location, and it can absorb it. And the reason it can absorb it is that the sight and sounds, the meaningless 26 letters, they're not pictographic, they're just a, b, k, d. Since they don't have any particular pictorial meaning, they can translate and absorb like a sponge any particular meaning form of writing. And that's the ideogrammic form. So the phonetic alphabet can move out and absorb cultures back into itself. That's how you get a space domination.
Now, why didn't the Egyptians and Sumers do it? Because it was on hard tablets, it was hard to move?
Yeah, not portable. They
Okay,
just
so
stayed in one place.
Paper was, so it needed to be portable.
Yes.
And
light,
and you needed to be able to
and have a simple language to learn. 26 letters. You know, the Chinese scholars, this is well known, they have mandarins who take 20 years to learn 10,000 letters. And that's just for their culture. So they're not going to take that language and have another culture learn it. They stay isolated within their own cultural womb.
Then when that fragmented, when that time fragmented, we were in a society that we could look at a symbol, let's say a symbol, and we could derive a whole sentence or a whole thought from a symbol.
Right.
And so that was more on a communication through the psyche, in a sense. It wasn't sitting down reading this out.
We can call it right hemisphere in brain.
And so when that happened and separated, then all of a sudden we lost a lot of our, throughout the ages, we lost a lot of our psychic ability, a way that we can communicate on thought patterns versus having to take and write out all of this and speak a language that takes a long time to do it.
Yeah, because that form is very right-brained when you're seeing whole pictures.
Yes.
That's the way the right brain works. But when you're breaking it down into individual parts, and it's
you
very
enhance
linear,
the left hemisphere.
That's a left brain.
Right.
And the Illuminati grew out of a left brain society.
That's right.
Now, we were talking before, the Illuminati is a name, it wasn't 6 guys sitting in a dark room thinking this all up.
No. It was the tribal structure, that oral, time-based society. When they started to be able to move out into a left hemisphere social structure over space, they had to organize it and remember, they're sending out information for armies to fight, but the motives of the fights, the instructions, the strategies have to be kept to an inner elite. So just by doing that, you're creating a select inner circle which knows what the motives are of the messages that are going out and just being received robotically by the armies and the commanders.
Yeah, because if it fell into the barbarians' hands,
Yeah.
they couldn't read it anyway.
Right.
So in a sense, it was a secret society
That's
of
right.
those that could be able to read the written word, other than the pictures.
Remember Archimedes said, I could move the world if you give me a place to stand. The alphabet allowed human organization to have a place to stand that couldn't be seen.
Now, stay with us, guys, because we're going to take you on a voyage through in time to show you where things have changed, just like that fragmentation that we were talking about earlier, out of the right to the left brain, or from the left brain to the right brain. The fragments occur throughout our history, and we're going to be following this. Let's move up a little bit in time. We talked a little bit about around 800, I guess 800 A.D., King Arthur, 900 was around there, and you said that there was a metaphor of something that is known throughout the world in any language, I think, of the King Arthur story.
Let's just step back. The Romans were more successful than Alexander because they had more papyrus and road building structure over several hundred years, so they lasted longer than the little mini empire that Alexander tried to set up. The Romans inherited the benefits of the phonetic alphabet. Now, the Egyptians succeed in toppling the Roman Empire, and it fades out over several hundred years because they cut off the papyrus supplies. So we go into the Dark Ages, what's called the Dark Ages, but actually you're moving into a right hemisphere environment, and that's why we have all that mythic stuff about the Merovingian dynasties and Psychic and Merlin and this kind of goddess culture in the right hemisphere retrieved period after the collapse of the paper-based, papyrus-based Roman society. Now the symbol, Arthur shows up just as you're beginning to get to a new linear paper society. We haven't got it, but the knights represent a new structure brought in by the horse collar. With the horse collar, you could then have people organized around you, and you had to have the knight go and fight wars. So you had to go and find a place to fight a war, a sense of outside of your local area. So you see they're starting to visually orient again to a place, and it was Jerusalem. But within that comes the Arthur myth, and that is that Arthur and Galahad take the sword out of the stone. Now the stone is the tablet, the Paleolithic culture, the goddess culture, the right hemisphere culture, and when you took the sword out of it, then one individual could go on a militaristic or spiritual quest by himself, not within the tribe, which was the characteristic of the Stone Age, and the Paleolithic culture. So taking the sword out of the stone is the beginning of retrieving a new society based on paper, which would create a new Illuminati. That's the meaning of that myth.
Now I'm going to kind of backtrack a little bit because I think it's important that we backtrack here, because once that fragmentation and the Romans were involved, another man came to prominence, and he's been around for 2,000 years. Jesus Christ happened at this period of time. Was he an individual that was trying to take us back to a position of our psychic ability, take us away from the written language, or was he, what part did he play in this?
Well, what was interesting is that the Nazarene, we could call him, he, as he's been sent down, he's been a representative of tribal values of group cohesionness and unity and oneness. So he definitely was trying to retrieve some parts of the right hemisphere society. But he did choose to embed his message in the alphabet, because he knew that that is the only way a message could spread over space. Now, if he was the Son of God and he knew the fate of the next 2,000 years, then that was the right medium to put his message in. But the content of his message is tribal, we could say family values.
Right.
Tribal values, and definitely that was an anti-environment, a rebuttal to the Roman visual left hemisphere environment. And he was a great healer, that's right hemisphere talents. Right. So he certainly iconically represents the right hemisphere's answer to the Roman left hemisphere.
In a sense, he was, I mean, I don't want anybody turning the channel or turning it off, but in a sense, he was a Merlin at that time.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's also important, I would think, when you're dealing with right brain, you empower yourself, because alternative healing is about self-healing, and it's not about giving all your power away.
It's within a unified context. You know, in a cohesiveness, a tribal cohesiveness that you have the individual power. It's when you enter a left hemisphere society, and I'm not judging it, we're just describing the structure of the two societies. The left hemisphere, you become an individual talent, and you work for operating out of time context, out of local context, which would be cohesive, to being a mobile individual available to administrate on all levels over far ranges of space. So yes, that is a giving over in a robotic kind of behavior. Definitely different from the self-empowerment that a right hemisphere culture would have.
Right, and more mystically involved
Yeah.
with the inner life.
And the external, more in tune with nature.
Yes.
Because remember, with the alphabet, you can start to contain and categorize the parts of nature. And science comes out of Greece. And then it's replenished with the printing press. And
Okay, before we get to the printing press, we're going back, we're still coming forward in time after Arthur the 1000, now we're going to about 1100. We come into the next group of knights or warriors,
Yep.
and has been known as the secret society and led to a lot of investigation and speculation and many books, and it was the Knights Templar. Stopping right there at that point, what we have right at that time is we have Christianity, we have Judaism, and we also have Islam that, in a sense, are fighting for the same position. Why? How did the written language work that out? Why was that going on in that sense? Because we were having crusades. We don't have anything to do. Let's go attack the Moors, and so where did that come about?
The phonetic alphabet was brought in by the Phoenicians in a trading function. It was just an accounting technology, the phonetic alphabet. And the Semitic races, but particularly the Hebrews, were the first to develop it. So what did they develop? A monotheistic concept, a oneness, not the tribal, multi-level gods, which is an acoustic right hemisphere environment, social structure, where you have a sense of nature images and a pluralistic society in terms of deities. When you have the phonetic alphabet, you begin to isolate on one point. So the idea of a one God, monotheism, comes out of the phonetic cultures. So it goes from the Hebrews, and by the time of Jesus, you have the Hebraic culture, which is phonetic. He comes out of that. He founds a new monotheistic culture, with him fulfilling the destiny of history. Now, history is a linear continuum that comes out of the phonetic alphabet. All right hemisphere cultures consider all times happening simultaneously, past, present, future. Their ancestors are part of their life, the future. They don't break up history into a continuum, which may be why the Nazarene put his message in the alphabet, because that would be a medium for continuing the concept of history, and he was the fulfillment of history, was what we've been told, right? So what also comes out of that period is Muhammad with a third monotheistic culture.
Right.
So the Mediterranean is the crucible for the effect of the phonetic alphabet and manuscript culture on religion, and that's why those three come out of there, and they're monotheistic. Now, when you get the Dark Ages, and the only reason the Arab culture has a continuing renaissance in the late 800, 900 is they are not cut off from papyrus. They have parchment. They're different from the Western religious structure in Rome, and they're more iconic because the parchment is not as mobile as papyrus. But they keep the monotheistic religion going. When you then recover a bit of a renaissance in the time of the Knights, they're beginning to intuit a left hemisphere culture, and patriarchy is brought back in with the Vatican, and the goddess culture that was around medieval cultures in the West, that gets suppressed. And I would just say, if one wants the historical elucidation of that, there's a new book called The Alphabet and the Goddess, which one just came out by an LA neurosurgeon. You can get this history I'm referring to in more particular details.
So what's the name of the book?
The Alphabet and the Goddess.
And who is the...
I think it's Schlein or Schleinberg. I can't remember the author.
Okay.
But it's just out on the stands over the last 6 months. So the Knights, now note, they start to get a left hemisphere orientation. They want to leave their local town and go to Jerusalem. So
Why do they want to go to Jerusalem?
because you had certain the monks have preserved manuscript culture and the alphabetic culture. And then as trade increased around 1000, 1100, you start to get a beginning of an industrial culture.
Right.
But it's very primitive, and that's a left hemisphere culture. And so, but they haven't got the printing press yet. and they don't explode in a real Renaissance until the printing press. So the Knights Templars attempt to be an Illuminati, but they can't hold it because they don't have the proper medium.
Well, you know, we're talking. It's easy to say that they can't hold it, but they were around for 200 years.
Oh yeah, I mean they can't hold it for 500 years.
Right. And we're here.
Rome held it for 500 years.
Yeah.
But in a way, it's because they're spreading out, but they're also isolated.
Yes.
From
and
each
they don't have
other.
the network. They don't have the roads and the paper routes.
Right.
And they have all these battles and they get beat up.
And isn't it too that it becomes more underground secret amongst they're trying to tie the two in, one tribal and one with the alphabet, so that they're only allowing certain people to be able to read it. Outsiders couldn't come in. Codes were made, secrets were made, and yet during the Crusades and fighting all this, they were dying off too.
That's right.
And so that it was very difficult to do it, and it starts to lose, or it starts to fragment itself inside that group.
And then the plague comes, 1348, and that really gets rid of whatever that culture was. We probably don't have full information. Some scholars think there was an actual Renaissance in the 1100s and 1200s, but that's another issue. The plague wiped that out. And then you have the beginning of the real breakthrough for the West with the printing press.
And that's like... certain events happen in our timeline that only happen when critical mass hits.
That's right.
I mean, if Martin Luther...
the Chinese had the printing press, had gunpowder, but they did not have a left hemisphere orientation because they weren't conditioned by the phonetic alphabet. So these technologies were around, but it was the phonetic alphabet that was retrieved with the manuscript culture at the end of the Middle Ages, and then by the time of the printing press, that prepared the left hemisphere mindset, the Renaissance perspective, which was before the printing press. That mindset said, let's use the printing press to conquer space, not time, which is the way the Chinese had used it.
Yeah, it's interesting because if the Chinese had gunpowder, like you said, and paper, and they didn't move out like we're describing, and yet now we're looking at an alphabetic oriented culture that sees and uses their alphabet mainly for trade and commerce, a lot of it, and what better way to make a piece of equipment that can shoot that the other person would want too, so you sell it to him and you, so that you can make more commerce with that. Now that the Chinese didn't need to spread out, they liked it where they were, and so they didn't use it for that type of a weapon.
Yeah, well, somebody said that they were using gunpowder for fireworks.
Yeah.
Not
so
for
it's important
aggression.
to understand the printing press. When you say commerce, the printing press was the first means to create uniform markets with uniform prices. Never happened before. All of trade and commerce before that was haggling and bartering. No left hemisphere visual space structure, which the printing press brought in. So you see, they want to enhance trade and commerce over space because that's what the printing press makes possible.
And what is interesting how now we're moving more into the media because there's propaganda coming out with these books. And not only is somebody saying that, oh, I've got this wonderful device that somebody didn't handwrite it out, and I can mass produce these things and create a need for individuals to say, hey, I want to know more about this, so I need to learn this language. And yet they're babes because they don't know what they're reading, and they could be reading all this propaganda that somebody purposely put out, knowing that they're going to read it, to be able to control them and base them in that power.
kind of like today.
We're going there.
Yes,
We're
I
going
know.
there.
So a new medium is always a novelty. It's a law in media studies that any new medium becomes a new environment and it hypnotizes the collective sensorium. It's a novelty. So yes, they get so involved in the content, even though there's all these ramifications behind the scenes, that's them being propagandistic, but that's not noticed.
But wasn't it also still within some religious sects that like even the Cathars that were persecuted, and then you go into the Inquisition and the Jesuits, and there were all these little secret societies popping up around the area. And if you want to take the Jesuits were probably the most trained, most educated individuals.
And they had the office of propaganda as their official name.
Right, absolutely.
And they're responding to the effective printing press, which allowed the private person to read the Bible, not be orchestrated by a priestly elite who wouldn't even let them read the Bible, as in previous time-based societies. Protestant Revolution comes in, and they become militaristic, and they moved to the first, and your country's base was founded on the printing press and the Puritans. They come here for freedom of religion, and the Jesuits are built to counter that by the old medieval structure of the Catholic Church.
And this is when the Illuminati really first start taking hold.
Yeah, what
right?
we call the Illuminati.
And who are the Illuminati?
Well, first of all, what is the Illuminati? What does that mean?
The Illuminati is, if you take it etymologically, it means light, enlightened. And when you take an acoustic culture and then make it into a phonetic alphabet, you have made the visual aspect of culture and communication dominant. And that's enlightening. So the printed word and the papyrus word and the parchment are in an enlightening medium. Drumming, singing, oral culture is a dark, light through. I don't mean negatively dark, but it's not exaggerating the effect on the eyes. So the Illuminati means enlightened and refers to light. So look at printed materials as an enlightenment. And we had that with the newspaper era later, the Enlightenment, right? So, but back to the printing press, the Illuminati were, whatever wealth was gathered before the printing press, they were clannish, and different groups had their own wealth, and they would barter and exchange, and there would be a hierarchy, and there would be people who would be the richest and would be concerned about whatever organization of a barter economy that was necessary. But when you get uniform markets and prices, you can consolidate your gold and banknotes and wealth and credit, and then build on it and spread out over space. And then you get into a situation where different cultures are beginning to read, see their own language in print, so nationalism develops, but the unifying mechanism for that is the printing press and the banknotes. So the Illuminati is the money families, the bankers, who are organizing the common means of exchange between the different national printed societies.
Now, were these at this time, where are we talking, 13, 14,
we're talking 1500.
1500.
With the Fugger newsletter is one of the beginning points.
And these were families that got together? These were bankers that got together?
Well, the Vatican, what they had to do was begin to allow usury. And that's where the Vatican changed its policy, and the Catholic families had to get into the market. That was speeding beyond them due to the Protestant groupings, the Protestant monarchies, so that usury comes in, and that's where money works in a vacuum and doesn't make sense to a bartering culture, because visual space creates a vacuum where money can expand, yet it doesn't have a reference point. And that's the mystery of usury and interest, because you're making something out of nothing.
Yeah, because in reading the Renaissance and going back through all that period of time on books on tape that I was listening to, right after the printing press, there's where the big usury came in, and everybody was, you know, he says, King of France, you don't have the money, I'll lend you the money for this, but I want the tea that you're bringing in here to go to a certain area to do it, because I can get more money for it over there, and that's where the exchange went.
Right. So the Illuminati is not seen that wide by the peasants. I mean, the peasants aren't even involved. This is more the kings and the upper classes are doing the trading and the beginning. They're sending the ships out and ransacking North America and bringing back. They're just beginning to develop an industrial culture. And so among them, the bankers are very important people and very useful and a necessary council on foreign relations. They keep everything together. And this was all a novelty and seen as necessary. The disservices of the Illuminati happens later when the newspaper comes in.
And for those of you that, it was really strange in reading this, because it seemed like a lot of the European or Western countries that were run by kings and queens, they married into each other's family, not just for protection of each other, but it was more of a business type of a thing, keeping it within the family.
Keeping the books straight. Think of that metaphor. Keeping the books. And they had accountants and lawyers and bankers. They were keeping the books, and everything was orchestrated around the books.
And a lot of the advisors were involved in the banking, and they would advise the king to go have a war, because you need to have this war to be able to have commerce, to be able to do this. And so the people that lost were the people that couldn't read, because they were probably the ones that were fighting the war, or if they could read, they were reading their own propaganda.
That's right.
For God and country.
Hypnotized by seeing their own language in print, because before that, in the medieval period, there was a global Esperanto. It was Latin, and that was among those who could read. So so people are seeing their own culture and their own language in print. That's a form of extension of vanity and a distraction from what's really going on with the effects of the printing press.
So now, within this group of elite, there has to be the top,
It has
you know,
to be the secret elite.
The secret elite.
Yeah.
So there's still levels of and
That's
hierarchies within the elite.
And the secrecy was that since wealth was produced by these uniform price markets, the secret element, the hypocrisy and the hidden knowledge was we have to allow these different national groupings that are becoming literate to continue to fight in war with each other so we can keep the economy going. It's the Iron Mountain Report was a fact back then. You know, the famous Iron Mountain Report. This is the way they had a sense of keeping momentum. You have to begin. Remember, you take Francis Bacon, a key period. He's a scientist, he's a secret society, and he's a chancellor of the exchequer. He's a merger of all that. And he's also writing utopian visions to project where we're going. Because when you get into a left hemisphere society, the future becomes a destination syndrome. You've got a continuum of time, and you want to go somewhere. So that's a psychic collective effect on all the participants in the society, but the individual members don't see that.
Yeah, if you don't really know where you can go, where we're going, you can build it your own. You can make it happen by just writing about it and saying this is the way we're going, and most of the time people will follow.
Yeah,
So
people start
centralization comes in, and the secret society is the centralization of social structure, and that is the beginning of the consolidation and the preservation of the Illuminati in terms of gold and wealth and credit, and that goes for 200 years.
Okay, now I'm going to go back, and we've talked a little bit about this today, but you had, let's go back to the Templars and the fragmentation of the Templars at that period of time, because they were the banker. They were the ones that the Pope feared. They were the ones that the King of France feared.
They were intuiting the possibilities of a new retrieval of a space-based society.
And once they became really fragmented, there was a number of different secret societies sprung up because they had no central core.
No centralization.
Yeah. And some, I believe, that's where the skull and crossbones come from the pirates. They went to the New World. Other ones went to Scotland. Other ones became Masons. Some of them became Knights of Columbus, and all these other
fragmented little tribal groups.
With their little secret knowledge that was once gained by the whole thing.
And what was their secret knowledge? It was a sense of destiny because they had gone to the Middle East and found some artifacts supposedly coming from the first family, Jesus, and that Holy Blood, Holy Grail thing. They actually did find artifacts, and that gives you a sense of reconnecting to a long past on your continuum. Because remember, you're going to the future, but you're also trying to recover the source of the continuum.
Past where it was, right.
Well, you know, some people think that the Masons still are playing a very big part in all this. That they are really.
The Holy Blood, Holy Grail myth involves families that go back about 500 years, and yes, they have the artifacts, and they hope to spring it on the world. But as we'll get to, the world doesn't care in terms of information anymore. So that's a problem.
Okay, so let's go to England now. You said that England was separated because of the continent was
Archimedean place to stand. See, the British Empire has a jumping off point because it's not involved in the old tribal conflicts that are then nationalized, and you have all those wars on the continent. Britain is a fulcrum. It's Archimedes' place to stand. It has a distance. And actually, it's of an advantage to be a tiny island off the continent, so you can begin to branch out like a spider and organize your left hemisphere visual space-based society.
And that was why England seemed to be immersed in this taking over the world there. You know, I mean, the sending and colonizing. I mean, it was just like a...
And all the other cultures, I mean, they knocked off Spain. Spain got the jump in Latin America and South America, but when they knocked off that old feudal culture, then they were able to take the advantage, and then all the other cultures had to play catch-up. So you have that mad race of colonization for 200, 300 years, which we wonder, why didn't they stop? Why couldn't they see the effects of it? But remember, they're hypnotized by the fact that the printing press and science can now organize and categorize the constituents of nature and make industry. See, we could swallow nature. That's what the image of Copernicus was, that we no longer were inside an environment and resonated with it. We now could, with our left hemisphere structure, swallow nature and remake it. And that's the Baconian program of science.
Wow.
Okay, so take us
to the next.
So we have this consolidation of power, and it's the Protestant era, generally for 200 years, the British Empire. They have squabbles and ups and downs, but they have the advantage because they jumped into the industrialization earlier than the rest of the cultures, the European cultures.
But keeping in mind that at this point in our timeline, that it's pretty well established that whether you were the King of England or the king of
From the
Spain
Illuminati's point
or
of view, it
any of
didn't
the
matter.
other people, it was more of a commerce. It didn't matter.
They were
wasn't
integrated on
boundaries.
the banking,
In the banking.
on the gold. And remember, they're going to North America and South America to get gold.
So when one would fight with the other, they'd finance both sides because that's commerce.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
So there's lots of disservices and inhuman effects of this, but humanity, you can see, didn't stop itself.
No.
It was such a collective effect.
Right.
In media studies, we call this, it was an invisible environment. It wasn't until the 20th century, when we've been through many technological environments, that we can look back and see the effects of those earlier, actually innocent environments like the printing press, compared to what we have today.
So our scientists at that time were equivalent to what we would call a Sufi or a priest back in Egyptian times. They were the keeper of the knowledge?
They were the
They were
keeper of the
looked at that,
knowledge,
they
but
were-
here was the point, is that they had to have a democratic image. The idea was to educate the peasants to encourage the development of more scientists.
Well, just
It was
educate
totally
them
different.
enough.
Yeah. Well, yes. Educate the ones that would be extra talented would then be brought into the inner sanctum.
right.
But you still had to have people writing, reading, and working in laboratories.
To make everything else work for
Yeah,
you. As it starts to pyramid up,
Yes.
you need more people to...
You need more people to rebuild the
right,
structure,
right.
and therefore you have the ideal of education, different from the old Egyptian priestly society.
Yeah, and really, truly, education didn't come in until, probably 1700s, where people could go to a school. I mean, I think England even started that to be able to start educating the younger people. They actually, the king actually started funding some schools to bring in more
That's
people
right.
to educate them, because the bankers or whoever were doing the thinking at that time knew that they needed more converts, if you will.
You need
in a
more
sense.
bureaucrats.
They formed another religion,
That's right.
in a sense.
A religion of
Right,
science.
of science
Yeah.
and literacy.
Yeah.
Well,
And we're going to move up, and then the newspaper then creates another shock. And then you have the Ben Franklin Revolution, and the American dream is built, and the newspaper contains many book pages. And that it gives a sense of emotion of multitude where we educate even more people. So the newspaper is different from what Bacon saw.
Right. You were going to say?
yeah, I was curious though, because we're talking about like the nobility
Yeah.
being a part of these, of course, because they're the power elite. Were these people Christians, Muslims? I mean, you hear about the Jewish bankers. That's something that
Yeah.
comes up.
With
So
the
what
Illuminati
part do
bankers.
all these different religious sects play?
Well, the myth of the Jewish banker, which is a fact, is that the fact because the Jewish race was rootless and did not have a local time zone, and remember, they are the experts in the left hemisphere medium of the alphabet. Their religion is based on that. They actually have been wandering for hundreds of years, and therefore they're the perfect bureaucrats for the banking structure that's set up, because they're not rooted in local zones where that old feudal hangover is, and people still, remember, this industrialization takes 200, 300 years. There's a lot of oral culture and folk culture going on, but in the centralized cities, you need a group of people who can be mediators, but are not part of the local religion. So the Jewish race fit perfectly into being the administrators in the banking networks.
Not only that, but they could also be a person that had been blamed for a lot of things throughout time.
Yeah, because
And
you
so
had
if they
you
need a
had ups
blame
and downs.
person, you need to point to
Yeah.
somebody. There was. And as much as in Spain they tried to just get rid of all of the Jews as much as possible, the leaders of the countries would take the Jews that were bankers and stuff and keep them and say, if you swear to be a Christian, we'll save you and we'll put you into this big thing. And the Jews said, well, I'll tell him what he wants to hear and still work for him in this way and this way instead of getting sent out to the ghetto.
But that's why Spain fell behind.
Right,
Because they kicked out
them all
generally
out,
the
right.
literate tribe of the Jews.
Yeah.
So when the newspaper comes in, because we know for 200 years the Jews are working the banking administration, but they're ghettoized. When the newspaper came in, you have the rise of the Rothschild family, and that springs out of the ghetto and accumulates a base of wealth which is sort of separate from the Christian banking families. And that creates a tension there. And that's part of the interesting effect of the newspaper. And then that raises the Jews up to be even more scapegoat because they're the nouveau riche.
Right, right. Now the newspaper, is the newspaper something that comes out, it isn't like a book a book
page
is a
with
history.
many book pages.
Right, but it's a book is a history of something that might have happened a year ago or 2 years ago. Now you're getting the news that happened last week,
Right.
or something that happened maybe 6 months ago in Europe. that is coming out. I mean, you're bringing now.
The nowness, the nowness effect that
you're
we know.
shrinking that line.
Yeah,
and
yeah. Now the nowness, and that inspired all kinds of. You have literate people coming up who are not part of the organized educational system, and the radical people like Rousseau. They're developing whole new concepts and ideas. And part of a literate society is it's subject to propaganda. It loves new ideas, new content for the book. Now, with the newspaper, you've got different cultures coming in the news, and you have a bit of a more global village or cosmopolitan view. And that inspires a more democratic view and new revolutions. Knock off the old feudal, the old nobility which was running the print-based science and education. Let's have mass education. And then all those industrial revolutions at the end of the 18th century.
But the elite sort of still stay.
The reason the
above
Illuminati is
all
still
that.
there is because Ben Franklin and them want to spread the wealth, but wealth is still engaged in the medium of gold and banknotes. And that is a medium, and it stays there, like an oyster shell. And it is always maintains its position of being there first. And that's why you have the legacy of inherited wealth, because gold and banknote, the first printing press medium that's centralized, it is still there. You're now layering new media over it. The steam revolution, the newspaper, and then early electric technologies. But the Illuminati still runs the books that set up the wealth base on gold, because if you had gone to South America, the Indians there didn't want gold. It had no meaning for them. Gold is only important in a left hemisphere society. So because that's the anchor, the first medium to build up the left hemisphere society, then it stays there as a centralized inner sanctum. Because Ben Franklin wanted to create wealth for people, money, but it has to be translated back into the gold medium. So you see how the Illuminati stays from 1500 to 1900?
So the Illuminati is now moved also into the United States or into America.
The Illuminati moves in. That was the battle between John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. The famous Hamilton-Jefferson. Should we have a centralized bank or have a rural culture? That was the new administrators in the American Republic dealing with the historical wealth in Europe. And the historical wealth, they've got their people over here pretty quickly. And that's a whole historical thing that Ezra Pound worked out and translated, the battle between John Adams and Hamilton and Jefferson, and the perspective in that. That's a whole history we don't have to go into, but that is well known to American historians over whether to have a central bank or not.
Oh yeah, in fact, whether it's this channel or one of the other access channels, they've done a whole history on
that period.
That happened.
Now remember, this battle is only for 40 years, because once you have the telegraph, which comes in by 1840 and 1850, now you have a new world where you create wealth which is not based on gold. It's the wealth of getting daily news every day. So information begins to become a form of wealth that's not linked to gold with the telegraph newspaper. That's the first intimation of that.
Not linked to gold, and I can see it because we've talked. Explain that a little bit.
Well, with gold you can buy food, and you can buy a book or two or a painting, but none of those artifacts can be changed every week. Now, if you have a newspaper coming in with new content, your senses want to read the newspaper. So that's a new form of artificial virtual reality experience. It's a new form of wealth. It engages your senses. And then you have new content every week, depending how fast the newspapers come out. So you can say you have a new painting, a new song, a new opera every day in your newspaper as you get into the latter part of the 19th century. Whereas the old form of wealth was a painting, a book, a manuscript, food. You see?
But you know, with that information, with a newspaper, with Hearst, you know,
Spanish-American War.
You can take, say for instance, if I had knowledge of, I'm going back, but of the gold rush, and you wanted to make everybody wanted to come over. All you had to do is print something that
in the newspaper.
Somebody found something in there, and you just found a little teeny nugget, but you can make it bigger than what it was. And so you buy up all of this property without any money because so-and-so or the Indian isn't going to give you, or whoever happens to own it, it's all desolate land. I buy it for $1 an acre, I'm using our terms, of course, now. And then you know by printing this up and setting this feeling,
instant communication.
This communication, you know these people are going to come here, and you could just double your wealth without having the hard currency that you wanted to through the media.
So every new medium creates new wealth. The printing press created the Illuminati wealth. Now the newspaper and the telegraph create a more wealth for our average citizens, because they can move around and at least explore it, and they do become wealthy. So wealth is becoming spread out, but it's based on the medium of gold and print, and that's the Illuminati. It stays there, and it orchestrates from its perspective, and it orchestrates wars to keep its position viable.
So the Illuminati all the time saw the power in the print, and the print
Yeah.
was the media
Yeah.
at that time. How to be able to manipulate the populace by whatever they
Right.
wanted to print at the time.
It gave them the Archimedean fulcrum point to move the world. But then when the telegraph came in, that moved people on a different level.
Well, I think, I don't know if this is a good time. I'd like to just switch gears a little bit because
How much time do we have? How are we going?
I think we have about 15 minutes
Okay.
in this. But about 200 years ago, I believe you said, is when your family
Yes.
became involved with all
Good,
this.
that's a good switch.
So maybe we could,
Yeah.
talk a little bit about how the Dobbs family
The Dobbs
got
family.
involved.
Well, for someone to look at it historically, they need to read May 1854 in a collection of Charles Dickens' miscellaneous journalistic articles. They will find a story called The Toady Tree, and it's about different characters. You know what the toady tree implies. Different characters in London and how they manipulate in London society. You will see a story of the Dobbs family. The Dobbs family, he was a guy who seemed to know everybody in the highest levels of the parliament in London, and he always seemed to know what was going to happen 6 weeks before it happened. So this is Dickens talking about this family. Well, that's my family. Now, we were butlers and waiters in nobility 200 years ago, and then we moved through, and because we're part of a very special elite that's going to keep its interconnection pretty close to the chest, to the vest, they aren't hiring new people. So their butlers were families and went through generations. So I was born into the butlers that managed a certain family in Paris, and I was born in 1922, and that led to me having access to the decisions because my father was brought into the decisions. He was the first butler to be brought in, and that was because it was after World War I, where the Illuminati got weakened. See, we're leading up to 1929 when radio and that information environment obsolesces money, and that's why money is given out in the 30s in the welfare state. But in World War I, the Illuminati thought they had to preserve the value of money, and that didn't work. The war was a disaster for that noble culture. And the 20s was a roaring period of technological development.
So you were actually recruited as a secret police for Illuminati, an elite.
I wasn't recruited. I was born into it.
Born into it.
Yeah. So what you have is my father, by the time I was in my teens, and I actually went to Munich and saw him talk to Hitler in 1936 at the time of the Olympics. In that environment, he knew that the Illuminati didn't have a stronghold in the sense that they had 150 years before, though he didn't know what it meant, but he was careful. So he encouraged me to look at a way of getting out of this situation for the family. He thought there was a dead end coming up. So I bided my time and was a gopher, a messenger, and just to make it historical, in 1952 I was involved with the Iranian Revolution, and in Guatemala a year or two later. And I represented the intelligence network that wanted to support the nationalization of those countries and their economies. But it didn't work, and then I was expelled, and, well, my faction lost its credibility because we blew that and the people that we supported lost. So I was exiled to North America, and then I got involved with the Information Society of North America after in the 50s. But that's a quick run through. But basically, my father, because he got into the Secret Council then, and no butler ever was part of it. But in the breakdown of World War I, in the panic, they need more information exchange faster. So my father, as a butler, was brought into it, and then I inherited that. So that was the unique situation of me being brought into the secret decision. But you have to understand, I know a lot about what's going on at the time, but I'm still a gopher in relation to what the Illuminati was doing.
You know, I think I'd like to just say something here because I know you mentioned it really quick. I was born in 1922, and you know, I don't know if people are doing quick math, but that makes you a lot older than you look.
Yeah, 77.
So I think probably in our next segment we're going to be getting really more into how you do this.
Yes.
Not only that, but I don't know what we have. We have 10 minutes?
About 10 minutes.
We have 10 minutes. In the next segment, we'll also be doing a number of different things. We're going to bring in the extraterrestrial race and how that fits in, how the media has even changed again and where it's going. We're going to go into places that we haven't ever been before.
And not only that, I think we're going to also be talking about why you are free to speak out the way you are.
And before we go, and because we're going to carry on and we'll probably just run, is there a website or someplace that people can get more information from you? Why don't you look over here in that camera there and tell them where to find that information?
They can email me at purple@ingress.com. That's I-N as in Ned, G-R-E-S-S, purple@ingress.com. And the website is www.positone, POSITONE.com/BOB, capital letters, only the BOB, .html.
Do we have that typed up
I
on the
think
screen?
they're going to be putting it on the
Okay,
screen.
if it's up on the screen, not only that, but Bob was involved with being an archivist for Marshall McLuhan for many, many years. It's unfortunately that we only have an hour live for you, the viewers, but we're going to be in studio here for the next 45 minutes also talking about it. So, and we will try to bring this up again for those of you who are missing the second period of time. What about
Maybe
this?
if we can let Bob talk about his books here.
Well, I had
and
a
what
talk
he's doing
show.
with this.
I had a talk show in Toronto in 87 to 91. Then I had a talk show in Los Angeles from 93 to 95. And that's where I discussed a lot of this information. And since then, my diary of the history of the 20th century and what happened to the Illuminati is featured in Flipside magazine, a magazine that's distributed in Barnes & Noble. And I have an archive here called Fata Communion with Bob Dobbs, which is a collection of my favorite thinkers and system makers that explains also what I'm explaining in this thing. I'm basically giving out the secret history of the 20th century.
And this can be Barnes & Noble, or they can
Every 2
email
months.
you about your book or
Yes.
something about that? Okay. So
So
where do
let's
we...
go back to the Industrial Revolution and the effect on the Illuminati.
All right, let's try to bring it up to about Roosevelt and the
Yes.
time. Okay.
So World War I was a problem where the Illuminati, the banking system was strained. The debts caused by World War I were unpredicted, and you also have the radio medium, the automobile medium, the movies, and the telephone. This allows people to exchange information, not by written word anymore. They're doing it orally through the electric media. And so that allowed a retrieval of right hemisphere group tribal mafias. You had the Russian Revolution, you had the Mafia Revolution in the United States, you had tribalism all over the world, and fascism and socialism. This was a great crisis for the left hemisphere structure of society. And it tried to hold on in the 20s and collapsed in 1929. With the wealth that was being generated in the 20s in the Western world, in the industrialized world, it was just so huge that it couldn't be kept within the simple accounting book format of the old bankers.
So essentially it got away from them.
That's right.
They built a train that ran away from it.
That disseminated into a decentralized,
Okay.
no longer on the linear pattern
Right.
of central control. And so the economy collapses in 1930 in the Western world. And what happens is the Illuminati just realizes that money is not a measure of control anymore. It's still there as a medium, but it now sits on the sidelines. So they gave the money away, the paper medium. Paper becomes a guaranteed environment. And that's the welfare state and the New Deal that Roosevelt brought in. Now Hitler and Europe is a different case, but they brought in a group mentality and a corporate structure too, where everybody was guaranteed jobs and that kind of tribal situation that was not measured in money terms as fragmentedly it was in the 19th century. So then we come to World War II and the end of history with the atomic bomb.
Okay, I got to get a message in here real quick. For those of you that want to know more about this, you can also contact either Peggy or myself, either at Peggy's place or mine. The number's at the end of the tape. We do try to promote the people that try to bring out this type of information. One of them is Bob Brown. He is having a summer conference that is August 14th.
Yep, I
Honey?
think we have it right here.
Is it? No, that's the wrong time on
Wrong time.
it. 15th through the 21st
Okay.
in Mesquite, Nevada, and I'm gonna. There are a number of speakers. They're going to be the list that they're trying to get right now. Zechariah Sitchin, Greg Braden, William Henry, Maurice Cottrell, a lot of people from the European countries over, and this is going to be held in Mesquite, Nevada. And the phone number, because I don't have all of that other information, I'm going to give you the phone number to call. It's in Colorado, and see if my new cornea works here. 303-543-9443. That's, you can get to Terry or Bob Brown there. It's an interesting week. It has 7 days of speakers from all kinds of modalities or thoughts, and it's one of the best that is ever held in this country, having to do with the free thinking, I think, that was involved. It'd be nice to see you there talking.
Yeah,
too,
I think you would be an excellent speaker.
It'd be incredible what you're going and doing. Once again, why don't you try to give out your website again for me and your email?
The email is purple@ingress.com, and the website is www.positone, POSITONE.com/BOB, Bob, capital letters, BOB.html.
And real quick before we go out, for those of you that either are watching the show that have Epstein-Barr or have chronic fatigue, please take down Bob's information and contact him about it, because he and his wife is working on something that will benefit you if this happens to be something that you're involved with. So with that, we're going to end this segment of the show. And for those in the studio audience, we'll be back up. For those of you that are watching this on tape, hopefully we'll have it in a two-part series for you later on.
Yes, and don't feel free to check our website. Of course, I didn't bring the address up here, but the Off the Record website lets you know what's coming up, who's going to be a guest, and basically what we're up to. So just keep checking.
Back. For those of you, this is part 2. I'm Ted Lohman.
And I'm Peggy Kane.
And once again, we're off the record, and whether you got that on tape or not, I don't know. With us, once again, is our guest, Bob Dobbs. I don't know, if you haven't seen the show prior to this, I don't know how I'm going to explain it, so just stay with us. And I'm sure that you will be, what?
Well, you'll be happy that you stayed with us. You may be a little bit confused at first because we have really covered the history of the ruling families, the Illuminati, and we're working up to how the media now is controlling our lives in ways that we don't even realize, we're not even aware of. We've also learned that Bob's was born into a family that was a part of the Illuminati, that he happens to be, if you can believe this, 77 years old, and we're going to hear about that, and how extraterrestrials have played a part in all of this.
So why don't you just take it for where we've left off and go right for it and go for it.
So when the exclamation point of history happened in 1945, the atomic bomb, the effect on the Illuminati, which are the people who control the meaning of gold, the meaning of private wealth, is an interpreted medium. When you have people coming out with a sense of euphoria after World War II and feeling part of a world society. The United Nations is brought in. There's a sense of reunification. The fragmentation that money had traditionally brought in is dampened by the fact that people can have access to money on a pretty easy basis by right of citizenship. For example, the GI Bill in the United States allowed people to go to universities. So, and there's an unemployment insurance, a kind of welfare society built up. In that structure, what is the role of the Illuminati? What is the role of that traditional form of control? Well, they realized they were out of the action, so they sat on the sidelines. But culture still believed there was gold and wealth. As a medium, every medium creates a historical environment that stays there, all right? Sits there like a lump. Just like we still have newspapers, even though it's a question whether we even need them anymore. That medium stays around because they're part of the invented nature, the technological nature that humans make, and like the sun stays, our media stays. So the Illuminati sits on the sidelines and decides, since information is the means of controlling people, they realize that information is content, but they want to look at what happens when a new technology comes in and how that shakes the organization of society, alters the organization of society. So they begin to realize that they have to have surveillance on new inventions and new technologies. So they decide to build what I call the solar government, which is the satellite networks, which is a form of monitoring information that is the content of media, which is all the different cultures talking about themselves, but they're looking at new technologies and watching for them. So the solar government is monitoring the world government, and the world government is the United Nations. And on top of that, you have new cultures in the undeveloped parts of the world just getting access to literacy and access to movies, and so you have a collage effect after World War II, where the planet is all these different cultures from different time zones of development are talking to each other. This is a chatter that accelerates through the next 40 years, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. This chatter is what I call technologies becoming conscious. Because as we implode with television, then the satellite, then the computer, and then the instant replay, which confuses people's perception of what time it is, because with the instant replay, you can have the meaning before you have the experience. All right? Most perception is based on the experience and then the meaning. With the instant replay, you have the meaning before the experience. So that's an example of the confusion of cognitive processes that a new medium brings in. But the medium that comes after that whole chip technology we call now, is the beginning of orchestrating and converging television, movies, music, radio, all that different electric media becomes imploded into a little petri dish. So we think of genetic engineering working with our body chemistry, but think of the solar government working with the petri dish and the chip and organizing all media on a more imploded, what I call holeopathic. We're creating a hologram effect on populations, a virtual reality, but it's getting tinier and tinier, like homeopathy. So it's a hologram, and it's diluted, so it's holeopathic. So society becomes more involved with the tiniest bit of information that affects everybody. Now that's the general process of technology becoming conscious and taking over the role of communication.
You know, you said something that was one of those fragmenting things earlier today when you said, and I never thought of it quite like the way you explained it. You said when you're on a telephone talking to somebody, you're actually bilocating in a sense.
If you have intercom, you're quadrilocating.
And if you're reading a newspaper, it's there in front of you. You're interacting right here. It's just right here. Okay. But actually, when you are talking on a phone, you could be talking to Japan and actually, in a sense, being in Japan.
Right.
I don't know, out of the body or
it's kind of like ESP. You can make things happen 10,000 miles away.
Right.
So you're there.
You're there.
And they are here.
Now, is that an understanding that group governments and thinkers and the people that change the direction of what's going on, did they realize that at the time?
I think the Illuminati understood that. I certainly learned it early from my father. They were in a position in the 50s to see technologies and what they would do because it affected them at the most deepest level, because they had the biggest stake in power because they had it all on the sense of wealth. To them, they preserved the human race. All right, they had a sense of destiny. So they would look at the nature of this, and you take a typical intelligence person at that period, he looked at his desk, he had reports from all over the world in different languages. And then when he had telegraph and telephone, he could communicate directly. Now, the average citizen did not have that experience.
Right, right.
So the Illuminati always was living in an avant-garde frontier of experience and seeing the effects ahead of time. So that's why they could sit on the sidelines and monitor the whole world through the satellite environment. We think of the satellite as a proscenium arch around us. We visualize it. But the satellite is your telephone. It is electromagnetic. It's a membrane that implodes and has you in touch psychically with everybody when you actually use it. So the satellite is the telephone, access everywhere, but it's even expanded.
So was there ever a Cold War going on during that period of time?
The Cold War is the confusion of cultures coming in different phases of development, because military hardware, which was a medium for the last 300 years, and especially after World War I, this hardware was a market, was a particular medium. It had to be distributed. So it was farmed out to the backyards of the world, like Korea and Vietnam, where these old hardware wars were being fought. The Illuminati understood that the real warfare was the warfare caused and created by Madison Avenue, software warfare. So the biggest, World War III was a software war since World War II, since Sputnik anyways, 1957. World War III was an information war, and that was the biggest control of global cultures than any hardware war. So in that sense, the Cold War was not as important as the information war. But the Cold War was the old 19th century military hardware acting out its own evolution and being marketed off into the backyards of the world.
So where are we going? Are we leaving that behind? Or we're not going to go into Kosovo? We're not going to keep going with that kind of stuff? Where it's more information?
Other cultures will. See, that's why the American...
That's why I brought up with that. I want to try to dovetail with China now.
Right.
Bringing this China thing in, because China, in the beginning we talked about China being these people with, instead of making gunpowder for weaponry, they were making it for fireworks. And now they're bringing in a culture that has an alphabet now, right?
Right. Now, when you have the TV and satellite culture, because it brings in imagery from all over the world, as well as your local imagery, this erases the immediate local identity, all right? This caused an identity crisis for all cultures on the planet. So what you had is the undeveloped cultures like China and Japan after World War II, they feel inadequate within their cultural framework. So they want to find a new cultural framework within the larger collage and confusion of the satellite culture, the global theater, so they want to jump to the West. The West wants to jump to the East in sensibility, and the beatnik and the hippie revolutions were symptomatic of people going to Eastern right hemisphere concepts and images. Now the Japanese and Chinese thought that was absurd, and they wanted to become Western. So what did the Chinese do? A drastic move. They brought in the phonetic alphabet 20 years ago, and then they got rid of Mao. Mao was already out, but that was already part of the movement, and they bring in the anti-Gang of Four who want a commercial society, an alphabetic society, an industrial society. So China goes west while we go east in sensibility. And so therefore China is acting out 1900. They want to have a place in the sun in industrial left hemisphere terms. Now what's ironic and satirical about it is that culture, they cannot accomplish that, because we are in an imploded society and basically a chip society, so they can only have a virtual version of the left hemisphere.
They can only go so
simulation,
far.
only so far. And so at the same time as they bring in the left hemisphere activity for the peasants, the elite is getting very involved in the computer trade, to the point that we want to have access to the new chips that they're developing. So you see the multi-leveled, so the world becomes a visual pun. And Finnegan's Wake is the book that shows that reality, and he wrote that out in the 30s. And the Illuminati used the Finnegan's Wake sensibility to understand and intuit the effect of the global theater.
A very close friend of mine the off-the-record group here is Walter Board, and is a very close friend of yours.
Yes.
And Walter's been involved in Operation Mind Control. Now, mind control isn't something that is new. Well, we've been talking
Every
about
culture
it.
is
We've been talking about
Yeah.
it for this whole
Yeah.
period of time. But it seemed to be there was a new language, a drug that was introduced into this whole thing in the 60s, or maybe even a little bit before, in the 50s. Talk about that.
Right.
Was it another form of communication or control or media hype, in a sense?
Right. Now remember, the Illuminati sitting on the sidelines, the managers, the multinational corporations took over in the 30s. But you have these managers who are literate, almost semi-literate because they deal with the written administration technology, but they also deal with telephones and electric media. So they're in between. So the managers come in 1945, and they want to have a world government. They call it the United Nations. At the same time, with their literate bias, they want minds to be merged and unified in this global image of a one-dimensional society. That is a natural image of society that comes out of the left hemisphere. So the industrial managers that take over after World War II, they want to control the information content of the world population. And so we are, at that point, we are so hyper-technologized and living better with chemistry, they thought that certain drugs could be used to control your central nervous system. And that was a mission that went on for 10 or 15 years into the middle 60s, where they thought they can control information. Now that's, if you look at William Casey and some of those other characters, Dulles in the 50s, these people are not geniuses, but they do come out of a bureaucracy that has a sense of purpose, and they think that they want to maintain the left hemisphere structure. The Illuminati was more sophisticated. They knew that that was obsolete, but they still knew these people and had to encourage whatever sense of activity the managers were doing to give them a sense of purpose. So it gets quite confusing. The main agenda of controlling people's minds through chemistry and mind control and hypnosis is really a rearguard action when you're already controlling them through the addictive qualities of television. That they didn't know.
That is a drug in itself.
Yes.
That they didn't know. And so MK Ultra was moved out, put to the side by the middle 60s, because by that point, after Kennedy and the charisma of that and the population and rock and roll and that whole media, that whole entertainment complex that comes in after Elvis, they saw that the population was so distracted by that that any issues like going to the moon were not something that the population would want to feel involved in because they were already traveling via television further than the
bilocating.
Bilocating.
Where does dissociative personality come in?
Now,
Walter just said yes.
I know. I can see him.
did he? Okay, good.
Yeah.
I could hear
I'm
him.
not in trouble yet.
No.
All right. So what's interesting is that we're educated people in this sense that we've been conditioned by print education, conditioned by movie education and TV education, and now computer. Now, if you take your parents, back in the turn of the century, or your grandparents even, they began to see the solar system. Yet it was so immediate that when Orson Welles did the Martian invasion, people thought it was happening because it played on a new image, the solar system. Now, the baby boomer generation, with telescopes and post-World War II technology, had access to pictures of constellations. So they had a bigger picture of the universe than just the immediate solar system. I mean, you look at the science fiction of 30s, it's really puny. But then you get into the 50s, 60s, science fiction gets a little broader. Now, think of these as collective images of first nature, of nature that the creator, whatever that was, made. I did not make the solar system as far as I know. I may have made it as spirit, but I didn't make it in the human form. But what I do make is language and technologies. And let's call that second nature. So as print, newspaper, movies, radio, and TV come in, they are a virtual nature that my brain identifies with, as well as identifying with sleeping out on the desert under the stars, which is first nature. So when you have a society being addicted to television on the chemistry level, all the old world views are brought up and focused on as a counterbalance. So people start to bring in the image of the universe, which you opened your show with, before that the solar system image. But think of these images and then think of the staticness of that image, of the swirling constellation, as beautiful as it is. Now, how does that image, like I said in the previous hour, how can a painting and opera compare to the newspaper or radio, which gives you constant information 24 hours a day, constant wealth? So you can see that people get lost in the media wealth, the software communism we can call it, that's relatively inexpensive in the 60s and 70s. So the brain still is trying to have an image of the first nature in the universe. So I can see the first nature image collapsing in the brain as people start to think the universe is Archie Bunker or any media fad that they see in the content of television. Within that situation, where is your brain and its imaging from first nature and the brain's images of second nature? Within that confusion, I think the population begins to break down and you have a retrieval of right hemisphere of hearing voices, Not that it may not, they may actually be hearing real voices, but you see the body image of the person, and the nature, the first nature it was resting inside of, collapses as the body merges with the second nature technological images. Because part of the bilocational is, not only are you everywhere in Tokyo, you also have information content. So you can have 10 experiences every day on television or on radio. So you see, what is your body image? So in the collapse of that, people start finding fringe, from the Western point of view, body images. So they go to Oriental chakras, or they go to acupuncture, or they go to satanic worship, iconic images. The point is I see the population developing something beyond schizophrenia and paranoia. They develop quadrophenia, which is cycling through all the old negative emotions and negative body images, as well as absorbing the images and impulses of the media. So when OJ comes on, 30 years after this process, everybody sees their own cultural matrix in that trial and ignores the particular details of the trial, and on top of that is confused by the endless coverage. So I'm saying the body percept of the individual and the collective percept of the society, of your particular society, collapses. And that is where we get hallucination and the sense of abductions. But I do want to go into the point that I do believe there are UFOs, and there's been 1 or 2 abductions. But I think we can explain the hysteria of body image as a natural product of the mixture of first nature, solar system and cosmos and universe, mixed in with the daily universe of media consumption. The brain may not be able to tell the difference.
So where does extraterrestrial intelligence come into all of this?
Well,
and have we been visited?
Right. Okay, here, I want to lay down for the record, I cannot prove this. There's no time to prove it. Just for the record,
and regular media wouldn't allow you to prove it anyway, because there's so much information that
they don't want proof.
They don't want proof.
Yeah, but you are an old-fashioned medium, have a human scale, you document what people say, and you preserve the tapes. So in the future, this could be a valuable archive. So I want to say what I believe is the situation. In 27,500 BC, you had Neanderthal man and another strain, which becomes Cro-Magnon man. The extraterrestrial civilization from Bootes, which is a constellation which has Arcturus as one of the stars there, one of the planet stars. That's it, that grouping. There's 7 of them in the Bootes constellation. That civilization came here and monitored the development of the ape, and they altered the wrist and the jaw. Didn't clone or anything. They had advanced technology that they could alter the wrist to make the ape's flexibility. You know, in Darwinian evolution, in traditional theory, the opposable thumb is a very key factor. But it was helped by the Booteans. And also they altered our jaw so that we could eat better, and that changed our brain chemistry. That simple change allowed the apes that were part of that stream to become a Cro-Magnon man. The Neanderthal man didn't have it. They died out. Now, taking from that point that the Booteans altered us, not completely, but were interested in seeing what happened to species on this planet and picked us because of our flexibility way back there. They tracked us from the time of the dinosaurs on, when we were that little lemur kind of rodent thing. You know what I mean? Before we get into the ape level. Anyways, that goes back to 60 million years ago. They then took these Cro-Magnon men and deposited them around the planet. So it did come from Africa, but it was quickly deposited. Some of them grew up and then died out. So the general drift is that the African Cro-Magnon man developed into Mediterranean culture. What was interesting is that by 15,000 BC, Atlantis and the Inca culture start to really blossom. Most of the world civilizations of that were pretty primitive, but for some reason the Atlantean culture blossomed out for about 4,000 years till you have the collapse of Atlantis in 10,500 BC. Lemuria was also in the Pacific Ocean. That was another smaller culture. But what is not known is the Incan culture that spanned the whole breadth of South America. Atlantis collapsed, Incan culture dies out, the Atlanteans move to, the survivors move to Egypt and help create the pyramids and that kind of culture. Very advanced culture, but not as advanced as Atlantis. But they had the advantage of Atlantean devices for levitating the stones. So I'm on the record for agreeing with that. The thing is that when we shift into, now the Bootians are monitoring this. I can't say that no Atlantean didn't ever see one, but you have to remember that people only see what they see. The limited perceptual abilities of the civilization at the time, they wouldn't even look out at that level of seeing a vehicle. They wouldn't see it.
Sure.
But what's interesting, we have to look at the primitive man as, for him or her, this universe was in their eyes.
Right.
When you start to get the Egyptian in the writing, you get a bit of distance. And that's the beginning of the development of the left hemisphere. The right hemisphere is totally merged with the environment. So the images of astronomy and astrology is a later development, long after the merged effect, where the whole universe was inside the early primitives.
So is that where we get shake your booty?
Yep.
I guess.
You know, there's a lot of,
Yeah.
use the booty. There's a lot of, it's funny how language can mimic.
A lot of
certain
slang,
things.
a lot
Language
of
is living
slang,
and
yeah.
contains our whole history.
Yeah.
And so we are, language is making a joke on us. When we use the word, language itself is laughing at the meanings, the deep level puns within it.
So do you think at this point that the
Oh, so I
Bootians-
just
yeah,
to continue.
okay.
Yeah,
So
we
the-
got to
We
jump
wanna-
a
we
little
gotta make
faster.
sure-
So the
keep
Bootians,
this-
stopped being around about 6000 BC, just monitoring but not interacting in any way. But they did exchange. They took people from different cultures around the world, put them together, and you had a guest on a couple of years ago who showed that the UFO imagery was in these cultures all around the planet. That
John
was a
Henry.
joke by the Bootians. But we get to the 20th century when we have come to an important technological development, and they're going to come back and communicate to us and establish their existence. And the Bootians are ambassadors.
They're going to show us their booty.
Well, you also said, though, that you thought that they were responsible for the crop circles or some of the...
I say the Bootians make the crop circles, and the crop circles are visual puns. In the sense, yes, Ted?
Well, I didn't mean to stop you right there, but Booty is a star cluster which has a number of planets
Yeah.
and the Arcturians, so it could be a number of different tribes.
Yeah.
It's trying to discuss Earth and saying that it's, the 5 races on Earth is similar. They probably have different people interacting with us, causing some of maybe of the difference of individuals that have been known in the UFO lore.
Right.
But you made a mention that they're here interacting with us since the 80s, and you also stated that would we be able to tell, and I think Brenda brought up that they were shapeshifters. Basically, they will allow you to see what you want to see.
No, they can be what they can mutate their physical form. They're in our physical universe. They can mutate any form they want, and they adjust to the cultures that they're beginning to establish contact with. So they will determine the form that they want that'll be amenable
Are they
to
here
us.
because we're screwing up? Are they here as an advisor, or are we leaving another? Are we fragmenting again with computers and the way we're going and the way everything else?
They are here because they're on the telephone. The whole universe is inside the electronic chip world. Remember I said you
yeah.
absorbed. They are now right beside us in simple space terms, because when you have an instant communication with electronic technology, space and time becomes minuscule. So they are within this situation that we've created, and they're as interested in what we've created as we will be in them. So any superiority complex that we project that they'll bring to us does not apply.
So we're in a big holographic movie.
That's right. And they're part of this vortex now.
So are they going to become open with their interaction with us? I mean, right now it's still,
Okay, the main problem they have is, since we're going into an ecological crisis through genetic engineering and a lot of other things, they did not, the reason the National Security Council did not admit that there was a body at Roswell in a crashed situation is that they did not understand the technology they recovered, and they thought that if they broadcast that they have this technology and they don't understand it, how do they know that a Russian or a Chinese or anybody might have a genius to figure it out? So they will always say they do not have the technology. So the Bootians understood that during the Cold War, admitting that the UFOs were here or were involved, or this civilization, would not be possible. So now in the late 80s, starting to 89, 90, we've had increased sightings, increased crop circles, because we're out of that Cold War paralysis. Now the military doesn't understand what they're going to do to us. No human being knows what's going to happen. So they're nervous, and so they encourage disinformation and fear and projection of paranoia about all these scenarios that we see in the popular media and entertainment, like X-Files and that is a way to keep people confused. But the Booleans themselves are here to establish contact and then have a dialogue, and they're not to be paranoid about.
So they're not here to, but do you think that this is the only group that's here?
No, there's many, there's the Pleiadians, there's different extraterrestrials. The universe is populated extremely abundantly with different civilizations. But the Booleans are the ones that, within that network of communication out there, are the ones assigned to communicate and bring us into this situation, or at least to make us aware. And then we have to react. They don't know how we're going to react. This universe is unpredictable.
Yes.
But I will say that the cattle mutilations are done by an inferior extraterrestrial civilization, and they're doing that for their own purposes, and they're not involved with
So there's a lot of different agendas going on at the same time.
different developments of civilizations.
Okay, now
But the Booleans are the ones who are making the crop circles.
Okay, so now bring us to the time right now with the media.
Right.
Why aren't, let's kind of wrap this up, spend the last 10 or 15 minutes wrapping it up.
We also want to find out how a 77-year-old human being can look like
Okay,
this.
but then let's do that
Right.
because we got about 15 minutes.
People are going to be very angry if we don't ask him that, I know.
We'll get to it. We're going to get to the detail. Now,
Okay.
the interesting thing about the solar government that I was part of, that collapsed when the chip came in. And the chip allowed technology to become conscious and engage in ESP. Now, what I mean by technology is from language all the way through, any artifact we make. Now, the environments that each technology makes is so imploded in the chip dimension over the last 20 years that it communicates with itself. So the information society and the content of media is not talking to us. It is the historical technologies, those clumps of technological environments and archetypes are talking among themselves. So we must understand that that the media is not talking to us, and one of the main factors of propaganda is to keep the culture in action. The machines have so imploded that they want to keep themselves going, so they're talking among themselves to hypnotize themselves that they're still functioning. So where does that leave the human being? On the sidelines, just like the Illuminati was 50 years ago.
But don't you have to move yourself away from the sideline? Don't you have to realize that to be able to actually take you out of that?
Well, this is our dilemma,
Yes.
which the Booleans are interested in dialoguing about with us about how the human being deals with this vortex of software dialogue among the machines that does not involve us.
Well, okay, but just let me, let's just say the internet.
Right.
Yeah.
That is, now the new
Jesus, it's
technology.
Download
And-
information.
But you could look at it as a way for anyone to communicate immediately with anyone else and just learn and see it as a positive thing.
It's a memory
freedom
theater.
of communication. You can whatever. So
Yeah, the internet is a memory theater. It's human beings remembering information in print, movies, and all these things, because when technology has ESP and is language conscious of itself, then it is not interested in stopping and saying which medium is valuable, which fact is valuable. It is constantly breathing like we do. It's an autonomic system that goes on. And so to have, like even this information, if it was true what I'm saying, this would be very important about the Booleans.
Yes.
But it is one little fragment among the wall of noise that's going on around the whole planet. And if you think you can put your little piece of information out there and that some other important entity at headquarters in New York is going to broadcast it, even if they did, it only has a 6-minute life cycle. So that's what I mean. There's no more messaging going on between humans within the information vortex. And the vortex is communicating among itself. But we're still here.
I know it. You can watch it on, well, the OJ was one, and this shooting now in Colorado. They're competing. They're not giving us information as I stand back and see it. At first I thought each one is giving a piece of information. I'm sitting here viewing it this way. It's not. If you take another look, a view at it, they're actually fighting against themselves with inside this box.
Yep.
Because you can flip it over here, and they're trying to. Everybody's competing. The machine is like what you said. It's fighting against itself, and we're getting so much information that information it becomes useless in a sense.
Well,
because
the
you don't know
internet
what it is.
organizes information. It's useless. The internet organizes it for you. You punch in, get your email or whatever orchestrated information channels you have, and you see what it gives you. So the technology is doing the thinking for you. Now, this is a more of an identity crisis than television brought
Right,
in.
you need to step away from that, don't you, and go back to the other side of it, go back to the tribal type of thing, get your information by actually functioning, looking at it, working with it too?
We don't know if that's the answer. That's the drama of cognition we're involved in. The machines are acting out a drama of panic within its own cognition, but we as human beings are acting out a drama. And then, so that's where I come in with particular information about the D cell.
That's where I'm
Yes,
going,
the
because
D-cell.
we have to go there.
Yeah, the D cell is something invented 40 years ago, but Joe Dunn Sloan was the one who carried it on after Mr. Brown invented it. And it purifies the water, energizes the water, and slows down your aging. Now, this has not been available to people for 20 years. It's been available to people that knew about it back then. But we now have connected with the people who brought it to us, and we hope to have it available in 6 months.
I bet Dick Clark had it back then.
Yeah.
Could have?
Could have.
I don't think
yeah.
he did, but he could have,
I
because
don't know.
how do you
They
know?
say never ages.
Because
So does this, you said this slows down the aging process
Yes.
by vitalizing the water that then you
Yes.
drink. And so you have been using this
For 30 years.
For 30 years.
So it slowed down the aging of my wife. So the situation is that it purifies and makes you hypersensitive to your body. Doesn't make you neurotic, but it deals with the most basic element, water, and gets rid of the fluoridation or whatever disservices the regular system has. But it adds an energy into it, and I don't know what that energy is. It could be anything. It could be chi. It could be zen. It could be antimatter. The point is, you can see it under a microscope.
Wow.
You can see the sparkling, and it's helped a lot of people with diseases. But basically, I'm interested in getting it out, and it will clean up pollution. And I will also say that we believe it will work better outside of a gravity zone. So the NASA will want to use it in the future to have vibrant water for their astronauts.
So you intend to have this available to the public at a certain
It's a
point?
very tiny operation. We begin to make it available within 6 months, and then it'll grow. And people, basically, you put it in a jar of water, and you keep the bottom half, you don't replenish that, you replenish the top part. If you have a bottle with a faucet, you replenish the bottom part. But anyways, you keep half of it energized, so that energizes the new water that comes in. And you drink that. So it's a simple mechanism in the beginning. But eventually you can put it into all kinds of pollution situations, and it'll clear out the pollution.
And this has been studied scientifically?
By the Ames research in the 70s, and NASA, and the family that has the D-cell now have the records of this. But they couldn't translate it into, technology wasn't interested. Because that was 20 years ago. Technology had its own agenda, language, and all that weird, what I call android meme. The android meme, which is the title of this column, is what we're witnessing. It's the technologies looking as human as possible, and they think humans are stupid. So the 90s have been riddled with stupid news stories to show humans that we're stupid, but the machine thinks that we are like that, so it's trying to match with us.
One more thing before we get off of the D-cell. When you have this available, will you give the information on your website?
Yes, yeah. I mean, we hope to distribute it. It's going to be a business.
So right now, if you guys got that website inside, go ahead and bring it up once again for those of you that want to get in contact with Bob. Do they also have their email on tape in there?
I think they were.
Okay,
they were
so if
putting
it
it
goes
on.
up, that's the way that you can connect with Bob and find out more information through that. Where are we going?
I wanted to ask also, how come you can sit and talk about the Illuminati without fearing for your life at this point?
Now that proves my point. The Illuminati is so scattered and disoriented and trying to, what I say, rediscover, reappear, and retrieve first nature, which is what you were trying to say, let's escape and run. How are we going to retrieve first nature when the genetic engineering comes in and absorbs it in the petri dish? So I was lucky to find certain people like the D-cell that preserved me, but the Illuminati is so threatened by its own human need to survive, and they know the information environment is useless and has nothing to do with them, so they don't care what I say, because the information environment is part of that android meme, which is conscious and irrelevant to the human situation.
No, I wasn't meaning cut and run. I was trying to remember who we are. Start to remember who we truly are, to
recover first nature.
Yeah, to at least reintegrate both sides.
Yes,
to bring them both together, so that you will be able to recognize the idiocy that is going on within the box, or reading, knowing that you've talked to 200 of your friends or 50 of your friends and nobody agreed with what the polls say, and then those people have talked with 100 of their friends and nobody agrees, but yet we're getting bombarded with
this is the moment of opportunity. The internet and the good thing about the 90s is it allowed the whole world population to see the fraud of information society. But what to do about it is the task.
Do you recommend, like we were talking about, a media fast?
Yeah, well, that was the strategy McLuhan offered in the 60s. He wasn't like gerrymander and wanted to eliminate television. He said, turn television off for 6 months, we see what the effects of it had been, and then put it back on more conscious. Now, that never happened. And we now have naturally come to people becoming conscious of the media and satirizing the media. That's the Jerry Springer phenomenon. People do not take seriously their image on the media. They just spit in its face, because subconsciously we all have come to the point that McLuhan had developed, and before that Finnegan's Wake, where we see the fraud of information exchange when the machine, in this situation, has become conscious, is not talking to us anymore.
So where are we going?
We're going to cold fusion, Pond's inflation, and into new medical technologies which will integrate the East and the West and bring in a new element like the D-cell, which will, with the help of human intuition and ingenuity, survive this situation. But the weather report today is we're not doing too well.
So is that why we need the intervention of the Bodhis?
They do not want to be considered the cause of the cataclysm,
the
and they
effect.
don't want to be considered the savior. That is their dilemma. That's their drama of when to show up and really do the fly pass or whatever appropriate thing that will communicate to everybody and won't be controlled on the media.
How long do we have before we need to make this change, or we will implode upon ourselves?
I don't know.
And you see all this genetic work as having the downside
That's
of that?
how, yeah, the downside, the genetic engineers will not understand that we were created by the Boudians, and that alteration, they will never accept that fact unless they talk to the Boudians, and the Boudians will make them believe it for about another 100 years. And because they don't fully understand their body in light of the genetic alteration, plus the other chakric energies, which the Dalai Lama is a great proponent of understanding, if they don't get beyond the paradigm of Western science, then they're going to create havoc in the genetic agricultural designs they make and in whatever they do with our fetuses. The Matrix, the movie The Matrix, shows you that everything's disappeared and where it could lead to.
So are we coming to another another change in the era? I mean, you were saying something about we need certain things because they are comfort. We need the newspaper even though it's obsolete because it's a comfort zone. We need certain things. We don't yet know how to get rid of certain things because we haven't brought in other things.
Right. Your show for 5 years, and I've monitored it a lot in New York, always comes down to the crux that it's obvious we're in a new situation that no previous society had. How we communicate within that situation is the problem, and I'm trying to show how to see through the communication ruses that we traditionally think. Because the left hemisphere society thinks, I communicate one thing from here to you. The point is, there's no here to you, we're all imploded, and then the machine absorbed that. So the communication problem of how to get out of this new situation or to get through it is what I'm working on.
How is it going?
Not good.
But yeah, because we're just so
Okay, for me-
inundated. You know, and like you said, you can give information about the booties, let's
Yeah,
say.
like I just
that
did.
is just like could be so unbelievably phenomenal, and yet for the most people, it'll just, you
Right.
know, because they've heard so much, and there's just so much disinformation just in the UFO field. I mean, we find that
my
out.
message is to explain to people why they are turned off from information. That's the unease, where their kids are learning information on computers, but they don't see it's going to go anywhere because they already intuit that information is obsolete. That's what I want to clarify.
Well, if information is obsolete, what is not obsolete?
The human stubbornness.
So the one-on-one human dynamic of being a part of, integrated into our environment, going more in...
You're using English to say that.
I know.
What you're trying to say cannot be said.
Mm-hmm.
So I take the human stubbornness.
More of...
You're using language, not necessarily
Yeah.
English. You're using
Right.
the language to
Yeah.
conform.
I'm saying those two words as an icon of what that means.
You know, there's some information in abductees or contactees or individuals that say that there's just no way of communicating verbally with an extraterrestrial, because they communicate in a thought ball. I mean, you just get wham, you get the whole concept of the whole idea all at once, and yet we're trying to break it down into lines and phrases and things that it's just so difficult for us to do. And until we make that move, I don't know how, like you said, I don't know how we're going to do it. Remote viewing is, in a sense, doing some of that.
None of these images that you have on your show, the UFO, the channeling, even that's why the Boudins are here, are involved in the drama. Even their amazing communication techniques cannot deal with the fact that the human environment, our technology, has come alive. That's the frightening fact. So in general, we're going to go into an apocalypse in this situation, including the terrestrials, and they're not sure what their position is in this. So I'm putting a spin on the extraterrestrial thing that shows that they are not super beings from other dimensions that have transcended. This is an ongoing evolution.
Sure.
And they're involved in the drama. So even if they can communicate ESP, nothing can communicate the ESP of the internet.
Whoa. Well, we got 4 minutes. Is there anything that within any period of time that you want to say? Or is there a way out? What does somebody? Does somebody reflect? Go within? Somebody? How do they accept
I say
what
they
you
pay
say?
attention to.
Very good. Pay
They
attention.
pay
Be
attention.
aware.
But not to the information environment, other than the little bits you'll naturally pick up because it's going to be bombarded at you anyways.
Yeah.
But actually, in my book, this book, Fata Communion, I try to highlight the archetypes of thought patterns that you can become ambidextrous with and get fluidity not only in your sensory modalities, but fluidity and understanding and ignoring certain information patterns.
I think it's really simple, too, and we've been saying this for years, that all you have to do is be aware. Just don't become robotic. Don't become that machine that we watch.
Stay interested, and that requires a stubbornness.
Yeah. And also, go a different direction to work one time. Don't take change your habits a little bit so that you become more aware of the grass growing and the wind blowing and the birds chirping. There are certain things that we can do very easily if all we just do is start to be a little bit of aware.
More flexible, because nobody's watching you anymore.
I think, too, I know for Nick and I, just having a garden and putting your hands in the dirt and, raising chickens and things like that are very grounding and centering, and you feel connected to something more basic and real that's not BS.
Right.
It's just,
Well, that's human. That's your human self talking about itself.
And even this is a form of information exchange and communication between humans, other than sitting in front of a machine, getting the feedback from the machine, or sitting in front of a television, turning the knobs and just being hypnotized and taken away. You get together with other people, sit down and have other talks and do certain things. Listen, we're out of time. I want to thank you so very much. Will you come back sometime when you're in town?
Certainly.
And do this again.
Yeah.
I also want to thank Walter Boart, author of the Freedom of
Thought.
Operation
Mind
Control.
And I think you can find him on the web, Freedom of Thought Foundation, if you want some further information about that. We are going to, well, this isn't going to matter because we're not live, so they're not going to need to do that. 1 minute 30?
Yeah, and also we're going to put up our website for Off the Record. I don't have it right here, but hopefully we can get it. We have a problem with our computer. Does not have the tilde, so we're having
and we're also having problems for those of you out there that have web TV, we found out.
Oh.
Because web TV isn't compatible, so Chris is going to try to fix that
We're
up.
trying to work through these bugs because we're all working hard on this website, especially Christopher Schmidt, and it's a really good one, and it's going to give you information about the guests as spectacular as Bob here. So we'll keep working on this.
Hey, and when you go back to keep watching the show, you'll probably see
Thank
the
Kay
show
for
back over there.
keep putting those videos on.
Lee. Yeah.
She's a doll, and so have all of our affiliates. Kay's been with us 4 or 5 years. We've got Terry and Bill Kreidler and Tom and Steve and everybody. So we got to say good night. We'll see you next time on Off the Record. Thanks again.
Great pleasure being
Thank
here.
you, Bob. It was really fun.
Time on Off the Record. Thanks again.
Thank
Great
you.
pleasure being
Thank
here.
you, Bob. It was really fun.
In reference to DID, dissociative identity disorder, that psychiatric syndrome, there's all kinds of different variations of the manifestation of that personality. But I would say, disregarding all the types and whether a person has 3 personalities or 10, and the fact that it could be triggered by trauma, I want to address the point that in our time, it could be triggered by other things than emotional trauma in people who are relatively healthy, because we're in a situation where people have a body image of themselves. Now, when on the telephone, as I explained earlier in the show, you're projected all over the place. You're there and here, there, and they're here. And if you do intercom, you're in several places. Our images of the social situation, the terrestrial first nature situation we're in, are going to be in clash because we can't visualize this. Now, on top of that, when people start seeing themselves in media and in photographs and video tapes at home video, their brain has to coordinate the image they got when they were a kid from the mirror. Then they have to relate it to the video image, which doesn't flip the image like a mirror. Then they have to also coordinate that with role models which are in the media. Just thinking of the amount of images, anthropomorphic images that people take in through various kinds of media, I think that there's no anchor. You can't say, as we get into the 70s and 80s, which medium is the anchor medium. 100 years ago, the book was the anchor medium in a society that brought in the photograph and then early movies and then the telephone. But when you get children born in the 60s and 70s, they don't get the book first. They get TV or now computers, and they get automobiles and telephone, all these media. There's no anchoring medium. So the content of a medium, whatever anthropomorphic self-images or other people's images, this gets hard to have a framework to organize. Now, regular society is going around, especially in the West, with traditional one ID. What's your birth certificate when you were born? What's your photograph? That's a puny self-image in relation to what children take in. So out of that, I think, you get the possibility in the population of dissociated, unconnected images, and as we get deeper into this electronic, digital society, people develop new ways of organizing their image in terms of different media apparatuses. So that leads to confusion of body image and mental image. So now you throw in emotional traumas within that, or even MK Ultra military people programming children for their perverse purposes, then you can really see a mixed up kid who has to, you see, you could say if they had if they had the kind of program of kids 100 years ago through early satanic rituals and whatever primitive techniques they developed, the kid has to operate and grow up in a relatively monomedia culture. But can you imagine being an MK Ultra victim in 1985 as a young kid, and then also coordinating with all these other people in their daily lives on the surface level with all these media images? I don't think it can be categorizable in ordinary psychiatric terms or even modern, even new terms. So DID is a phenomenon that humans are going to increasingly experience, and you could go back to Julian Jaynes and say this is the return of the bicameral mind or the right hemisphere. But I think those are biological. You think of your brain as a right hemisphere and left hemisphere. You don't want to program yourself according to those images because you are basically have a chip inside you with all the digital technology we have, and any body images you have are grown out of the chip phenomenon, where you're as a kid watching TV, and before you can even speak, you're picking up vibrations or communication signals from entities on Jerry Springer to McNeil Lehrer to Disneyland Channel or cartoons. I think that creates a great, what we would call an ESP human being, a person who can pick up with rapidity with the remote. All these images are coming through their being because the image of television goes right through you. It's not reflected off a book or a wall like a movie screen. This swimming like new dolphins of human beings in this media mix and able to pick up and understand rhythms of communication from facial imagery and all the behavioral signals that go out before the person can verbalize any of their cultural language, that is going to lay it down a very sensitive human being. So we've got kids who have, and ESP may be an old rear-view mirror term, not appropriate, but we have people who have developed ways of communicating with gesture and eye eye-ear stimulation rapidly that to put them into a national language like American English or Canadian or French is one limited medium, and that's going to begin to cause a conflict for these kids. So I think we're growing kids. I'm looking at the uniqueness of the medium matrix as it bombards people. And now, on top of that, kids now can work with a little petri dish, the phrase, metaphor I used before, with their little computers, and they've got all these media within that. And then as they have sophisticated computers in the wealthier families, they can interact on this ESP on this empathic level very quickly. So we could call that a recovery of right brain, but it is not biological. They are extensions of the machine. They are being possessed by the machine and all the media inside their internet experience. So we've got to sort of establish that maybe the machines, since they're talking to themselves, the human being is already going to have a dissociative experience because when they try to connect with the imagery they take in and they go to school and translate it, they're eventually going to find out that the teachers are operating under the machine takeover, and there's no real personal responsibility happening. And you could end up with little kids shooting people, and then you end up with Littleton. This is probably going to become rampant. So that's a problem that modern medicine and psychiatry, they have to take McLuhan's lead, or even get more paranoid and look into Jerry Mander's new books and look at the effect of these things. Then you have Professor Grasby in the Scientific American, August '98, pointing out how a kid or anybody, an adult, and he did a study on this, can watch a video image with video games on it, or no games, no content. The same dopamine receptors are being activated. So we have to see that the media and the machines are inside us. Now, if that's been going on for 30 years, at this point, the machines inside us are talking among themselves, and they're having dissociative identity disorder as a necessary survival, maintaining their own particular medium boundaries. I mean, Ted Koppel is a TV person. Norman Mailer's a novelist. Someone is a journalist. They stick loyal to their media until in the evening when they go on the talk shows and comment on MSNBC and do that chatter. But the point is the machines are maintaining their integrity but getting confused. Where is the human image going to be in relation to that? So we have to think of the DID phenomenon happening in people in the 70s and 80s. In the 90s, the machines are doing DID, and the human beings are an outgrowth of the chip or committee of electronic synapses that are arguing among themselves. So the image of that, the beginning map of that, which McLuhan used, was Finnegan's Wake. So go check out your Finnegan's Wake novel, even though it's more than a novel. Check out the book Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce and learn to work within that multiplex of imagery and languages and media in that book in printed form, so it's stable, so it renews the vitality of the alphabet. You use Finnegan's Wake to help understand the translation that's going on outside of you and inside of you, both anthropomorphically and mechanically. Do you have anything to say about that? Let me explain about the D cell and the references earlier in the show where my age came up and that the D cell stops aging. My age cannot be proven to you or anybody else since the CIA makes phony IDs every day. I worked in intelligence. Any visual materials of ID you could claim are fake, so I'm not out to prove I'm 77, but that's not the issue. The issue is the D cell is a mystery, and what we do know, and Jodan Sloan the D cell was researched by Ames Research Laboratory and NASA, and this would be, I assume, documented. These documents are still within the family's possession, though I'm not advocating people to call them up. That has to be negotiated. But I'm just saying from what I've seen is that the D cell can improve polluted areas. It can make people's gardens grow longer than usual. It can change people's hair color from gray back to brunette or black. It can alleviate diseases, and there's much anecdotal evidence on that. The point is the D cell has an energy in it, and when it's made, when the solution is ready to be put into a little cement cube form that you then use in your water, in the process of making it, you look under the microscope, a little light pigment shows up. Now, we don't know what that light pigment is. But the point is that that energizes the water and has all kinds of beneficial effects on our body when we drink the water. So you could say it purifies the water, cleans out whatever you don't want, fluoridation, chlorine, or whatever. But not only does it do that, and some people may not want all those things cleaned out, whatever their sense of health is provided by modern chemistry. But the point is that the energy, these little light pigments that are manifested on the microscope, that does something to the D-cell water. So it sparkles, it tastes different, and it makes you feel healthier. So, and also we have a report where the D-cell was used in a larger block form within a plastic tubing where at one end was a pond with sewage, and as this sewage was drained through the plastic pipe and flowed over the D-cell block, and so the water in the sewage would activate the D-cell constantly. After 2 weeks, the pond at the other end, or within this cycle, was clear. So it cleared out, it evaporated, dispensed with the pollution. This would be really valuable in pollution control. So we need to look at the D-cell, and we're getting ready to market it within a few months. And then we can bring in the scientists and they can look at it. Even though Ames Research Lab already looked at it in the late 70s, NASA supposedly looked at it, but I think NASA wanted to make their own version of it. They didn't want to have to deal with Joe's patent or whatever Joe had on it. They wanted to redo it, and they didn't. They wouldn't know how to do it, and I don't think they successfully recreated it, so they didn't use it. And we have a suspicion it can be used outside of gravity, so it'll be useful in space travel. And so there may be a magnetic element to the D-cell. Maybe the D-cell, little block, magnetizes the impurities to the little block, and maybe there's another dimensional level where the energy is added to it. So that's the mystery of the D-cell. Needs to be looked into, but we have a lot of anecdotal evidence that it's helped health, helped slow down aging. And I'm an example, 77 years old, and I don't look it. And I've been using the D-cell for 30 years, every day. So in closing, the title of this program was The Illuminati and the Media. And the Illuminati is a mystery situation in our culture. What I wanted to bring to it, after claiming that I was brought up in the Illuminati, in the traditional meaning of the term, I wanted to bring to the point, a new point to this topic, is the technological structure that allows societies to have different kinds of Illuminati and different kinds of elites. And if you find it hard to believe that someone who's in the Illuminati would go public with it, the point of this show was to say that in the 90s, information is so obsolete you can go public, because if there was an Illuminati, they don't care about information going out in the public. So that's why I can explain it. That's my alibi for being on Ted's show. The other point is, check out my website, check out me as you see more of me in the media, and follow what I'm talking about. You'll see there's a consistency, and then you will see, especially if you follow Flipside, as more information comes out in the world of the puny secrets that are protected to distract people from the real secrets, which are protected by public incredulity. As you follow the puny secrets that I give information to in Flipside, and as the government, as in the Kennedy case, they will have to release certain documents by 2038 if the law isn't changed. In retrospect, you'll see that what is in my Flipside articles will be proven by documents later. And so I'm saying, remember me in 30 years, check what I've read now, and then you'll see I'm pretty accurate, so I must have known something. But for now, let's move on with understanding the information structure and how the Illuminati is obsolete. And that's why all this phenomena, paranormal, UFO, interesting new manifestations of matter, I think matter is changing. We as human beings are tuned into it, and we can understand it. We can adjust to it if we understand that the old categories of information that the Illuminati stood on don't apply anymore. So there's an alchemy, a new akasha being made. Use my information for understanding the history, but that history is not relevant to the challenging and interesting new phenomenon that we're manifesting. And I think that cannot be said, and that's why all these guests on TED shows come to the point of trying to say something that can't be said, which leads to the humor on the show, but it also is the only way you can present this new matter is we only get it half understood and half expressed. And so the Illuminati is something that they are attempting, the residue of the Illuminati is attempting to maintain hold on the old definitions and the old matter, but they're losing. But they will try to hold on, and that's the drama of the battle we're in. So congratulations for hearing this.
In any language, I think, of the King Arthur story.
Let's just step back. The Romans were more successful than Alexander because they had more papyrus and road building structure over several hundred years, so they lasted longer than the little mini empire that Alexander tried to set up. The Romans inherited the benefits of the phonetic alphabet. Now, the Egyptians succeed in toppling the Roman Empire, and it fades out over several hundred years because they cut off the papyrus supplies. So we go into the Dark Ages, what's called the Dark Ages, but actually you're moving into a right hemisphere environment, and that's why we have all that mythic stuff about the Merovingian dynasties and Psychic and Merlin and this kind of goddess culture in the right hemisphere retrieve period after the collapse of the paper-based, papyrus-based Roman society. Now the symbol, Arthur shows up just as you're beginning to get to a new linear paper society. We haven't got it, but the knights represent a new structure brought in by the horse collar. With the horse collar, you could then have people organized around you, and you had to have the knight go and fight wars. So you had to go and find a place to fight a war, a sense of outside of your local area. So you see they're starting to visually orient again to a place, and it was Jerusalem. But within that comes the Arthur myth, and that is that Arthur and Galahad take the sword out of the stone. Now the stone is the tablet, the Paleolithic culture, the goddess culture, the right hemisphere culture, and when you took the sword out of it, then one individual could go on a militaristic or spiritual quest by himself, not within the tribe, which was the characteristic of the Stone Age, and the Paleolithic culture. So taking the sword out of the stone is the beginning of retrieving a new society based on paper, which would create a new Illuminati. That's the meaning of that myth.
Now I'm going to kind of backtrack a little bit because I think it's important that we backtrack here, because once that fragmentation and the Romans were involved, another man came to prominence, and he's been around for 2,000 years. Jesus Christ happened at this period of time. Was he an individual that was trying to take us back to a position of our psychic ability, take us away from the written language, or was he, what part did he play in this?
Well, what was interesting is that the Nazarene, we could call him, he, as he's been sent down, he's been a representative of tribal values of group cohesionness and unity and oneness. So he definitely was trying to retrieve some parts of the right hemisphere society, but he did choose to embed his message in the
Hello, I'm Ted Lohman.
And I'm Peggy Kane.
And we're off the record. Thanks for joining us tonight. We have a very special show, a gentleman that's come all the way from Toronto to be with us. And he has told me, Peg, that he has been watching our show since about 94, 95.
I know. Yeah, he remembered a lot of shows from the past that I'd forgotten.
Some of them I think I wish I would have forgotten. Anyway, the gentleman's name is Bob Todd.
Dobbs.
Dobbs, excuse me. Why did I get that? I messed it up earlier today, too. Bob,
Tony Dodd.
Yeah, Tony Dodd. Bob Dobbs. And if you don't have a VCR running, you might want to put a tape in. The reason for this is we're going to talk about why you're not getting the media, or you're getting the media that is so slanted in one way, and why you're not really getting the truth that we tell here on Off the Record. Why aren't there more shows like this? Why is the media afraid to show something like this? Or are they really afraid? Now, our guest has been involved in, what would you say, Peggy?
Well, from what he has said, he's been a part of the certain families that are called the Illuminati, and was born into this in England, and I believe that's right.
Paris.
In Paris. And so he's had sort of the inside view of what's been going on with the so-called one world government, or the most powerful families on this planet.
Or what the media has portrayed them as throughout the time, to either deify them or to bring them up, or to be able to point a finger in one direction and another direction. And we're going to be getting into this because it's something that you as a viewer need to know, what you're getting bombarded with since the advent of basically written word, the written language.
That's right.
So why don't we start with that? Thank you very much for joining us tonight on the show.
Pleasure, Ted.
And take us back. Take us back to the time when this, I think we talked about it, left brain, right brain started thinking, and where the English language or the written language, the phonetic language, has taken us.
Well, the concept of the Illuminati is only possible in societies that have a written tradition. In Roman times, it would be papyrus and parchment. It disappears in the Middle Ages, the structure of the Illuminati, and then comes back with the printing press. And so the Illuminati is a social structure, a social hierarchy made possible by the printing press. In simple terms, a paper society.
A paper society.
Yeah.
Now, the paper society, let's go back even further than the paper society. Let's start back with a great society that lasted literally thousands of years, the Egyptian society. Didn't they have paper? Or
They had hierarchies, but they didn't have the Illuminati. The Illuminati is a structure that conquers space over thousands of miles.
Okay, explain that a little bit with me.
Well, the most popular image we have of that is Alexandria, Alexander the Great, moving out over the Mediterranean and in the Middle East and into India. Massive spread, created a huge empire because he had the medium of papyrus to organize his armies. Now, Egypt just stays in the Nile area. Sumeria just stays in the Sumer area. Mesopotamia. They are time-based societies. They do not want to dominate over space. They dominate time, which is kind of an Illuminati in terms it has a priesthood. But it is a priesthood that is based on the medium of clay and stone tablets. So those societies are different from the Roman society, which inherits the Greek paper papyrus medium and creates roads and armies and bureaucracies. And that's a space dominance.
So the paper would be to be able to spread information to their commanders.
That's right.
And also propaganda
Yep.
to some of the
To the barbarians.
To the barbarians. But where does if you have a written language, and to be able to make it work, people have to become educated. They have to be able to read the written language, right?
Right.
How did that fit in? Did they have? Is that where they sent in monks or some kind of teachers to teach the pagans, if you will?
Well, our educational system in the Western tradition is based on the phonetic alphabet, and that's the Greek societies. Now, they started to have education in a more democratic level. It was elitist from our position 2,000 years later, but you go back to the Egyptian societies where the priests were in the 20 years to learn 10,000 letters. And that's just for their culture. So they're not going to take that language and have another culture learn it. They stay isolated within their own cultural womb.
Then when that fragmented, when that
Yeah,
time
fragmentation.
fragmented, we were in a society that we could look at a symbol, let's say a
Yes.
symbol,
Yeah.
and we could derive a whole sentence or a whole thought from a symbol.
Right.
And so that was more on a communication through the psyche, in a sense. It wasn't
We can
sitting
call it
down
right.
reading this out.
We can call it
And-
right hemisphere in brain.
And so when that happened and separated, then all of a sudden we lost a lot of our, throughout the ages, we lost a lot of our psychic ability, a way that we can communicate on thought patterns versus having to take and write out all of
Right.
this and speak a language that takes a long time to do it.
Yeah, because that form is very right-brained when you're seeing whole pictures.
Yes.
That's the way the right brain works. But when you're breaking it down into individual parts, and it's
You
very
enhance the
linear,
left
that's
hemisphere.
that's a left brain.
Right.
And the Illuminati grew out of a left brain society.
That's right.
Now, we were talking before, the Illuminati is a name, just, it wasn't 6 guys sitting in a dark room thinking this all up.
No. It was the tribal structure, that oral, time-based society. When they started to be able to move out into a left hemisphere social structure over space, they had to organize it and keep, remember, they're sending out information for armies to fight, but the motives of the fights, the instructions, the strategies have to be kept to an inner elite. So just by doing that, you're creating a select inner circle which knows what the motives are of the messages that are going out and just being received robotically by the armies and the commanders.
Yeah, because if it fell into the barbarians' hands,
Yeah.
they couldn't read it anyway.
Right.
So in a sense, it was a secret society
That's
of
right.
those that could be able to read the written word, other than the pictures.
Remember, Archimedes said, I could move the world if you give me a place to stand. The alphabet allowed human organization to have a place to stand that couldn't be seen.
Now, stay with us, guys, because we're going to take you on a voyage through in time to show you where things have changed, just like that fragmentation that we were talking about earlier, out of the right to the left brain, or from the left brain to the right brain. The fragments occur throughout our history, and we're going to be following this. Let's move up a little bit in time. We talked a little bit about around 800, I guess 800 A.D. King Arthur, 900 was around there, and you said that there was a metaphor of something that is known throughout the world.
Elite, and they read the manuscripts and the knowledge. That was secret knowledge. There was no involvement with the written materials, ideographic, pictographic languages in the written materials. There was no involvement with that by the average citizen in Egypt. They were involved in rituals and oral and chanting, and you could call it a musical society. So therefore, they were involved in that kind of womb. When you bring in writing, and it's particularly the phonetic alphabet, that breaks out of the womb of the closed society of orality and time-based into a horizontal structure, and you begin to try to conquer, and you begin to educate citizens, teaching to read and write.
You made a distinction when we were talking earlier, Bob, between hieroglyphs and then the alphabet as we know it. And that is an important thing, because obviously the Egyptians had what we consider writing, and the Sumerians also had writing, and so did the Orientals. But the Illuminati seems to be a European thing.
That's right.
So what is the difference?
When you bring in the phonetic alphabet, which the Greeks were the ones to crystallize because they isolated the vowels from the consonants. Oral society is a chanting medium where people learn what the pictures mean by active interaction through the singing and chanting, all right? Think of it as medieval chorals where they chanted, the monks chanted.
Right.
And that was during the Dark Age, not what we're talking about, the paper society. There was very little wide-based paper or parchment organization in the medieval period. But back to the Greeks, when you take the phonetic alphabet, it takes the thousands of pictograms and distills it down to 26 or 22 letters, 22 to 26. Those little letters can then go to other cultures which have peculiar pictographic media pertaining to their situation and location, and it can absorb it. And the reason it can absorb it is that the sight and sounds, the meaningless 26 letters, they're not pictographic, they're just a, b, k, d. Since they don't have any particular pictorial meaning, they can translate and absorb like a sponge any particular meaning form of writing. And that's the ideogrammic form. So the phonetic alphabet can move out and absorb cultures back into itself. That's how you get a space domination.
Now, why didn't the Egyptians and Sumers do it? Because it was on hard tablets, it was hard to move?
Yeah, not portable.
Okay,
they just
so
stayed in one place.
Paper was, so it needed to be portable.
Yes.
And light, and you needed to be able to
and have a simple language to learn. 26 letters. You know the Chinese scholars, this is well known. They have mandarins who take